They say everyone's got a breaking point. And I hit mine the day I found my own private lake listed for sale by someone who didn't even own it. It was a Thursday morning, nothing unusual, just me sipping black coffee and scrolling online. Listings for nearby fencing supplies, when I stumbled across a land posting that nearly made me drop my mug. Beautiful ranch adjacent. Lakefront lot, community access rights. The pictures showed my dock, my shoreline, my boathouse, even the old fishing chair my late father used to sit in. And the contact listed below the ad was none other than Karen Whitmore, president of our HOA and longtime thorn in my side. For years, she'd poked and prodded me with fines and fake violations, demanding I voluntarily allow community access to the ranch's southern shoreline for HOA events. And each time I declined, she'd double down with threats about easement, rights and environmental review compliance, even though my ranch predates the HOA by 40 years. I thought I'd seen the worst from her, until the sane outright attempt to sell off a lake she had no legal claim to. Using community, trust, and a false narrative. I marched down the gravel road to the HOA office, stormed past her assistant, and slammed a printed copy of the listing on her desk. Karen barely flinched. With her usual smirk, she said, "Oh, it's not your lake, technically. Part of the community's ecosystem now. We're simply formalizing access." Formalizing access. I told her she was out of her mind, and she coolly replied, "If you feel that strongly, call your lawyer, or better yet, call the police." So I did. But not before warning her that if she wanted war over land, she'd pick the wrong rancher to mess with. If you've ever had to defend your land from someone drunk on fake authority, you'll want to hear what happened next, because what started as a listing turned into one of the boldest HOA takedowns this county's ever seen. Karen had no idea what storm she'd unleashed. And if you think that lake was the end of the story, wait until you find out what I did with her own property. This is a story about boundaries, both on paper and in spirit, and how standing your ground means knowing when to draw the line and when to push back hard. Karen may have had a smug face and a loud voice, but she underestimated how deep my roots ran and how thoroughly I knew every inch of my land. Right down to the last fence post. The moment I saw my lake posted for sale, I went straight to my storage shed and dug out the original property deed filed by my grandfather in 1963. Weathered but clear, complete with signatures and an old county seal that gave me all the power I needed to shut her nonsense down. That deed spelled out in ink that the lake, the shoreline, and the 2 access paths leading to it were part of our private parcel. No easements, no transfers, no shared access rights. Wren's ridiculous listing was built entirely on fiction. But it wasn't just infuriating, it was legally dangerous. I scanned every document, maps included, and emailed them to my attorney Janice, who had helped me through a water rights dispute 5 years ago and knew this kind of HOA trouble better than anyone. Within an hour, she called me with disbelief in her voice. "She put your lake on the market, with her name as the contact? That's not just overreach, that's fraud." Janice immediately drafted a cease and desist letter and sent it to both Karen and the HOA office. The message was clear: remove the listing immediately or face a lawsuit for misrepresentation, defamation, and attempted theft. But Karen didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down. The next morning, I had a sheriff's deputy knocking on my gate, responding to a complaint that I had threatened an HOA officer and was obstructing community access to shared land. I nearly laughed when I heard it. I handed the deputy a copy of the deed, Janice's letter, and screenshots of the fake listing, all while inviting him to walk the perimeter with me. After 5 minutes, he shook his head and said, "I can't believe I'm saying this, but you've got one hell of a case. No charges, no warnings, just a friendly recommendation to document every encounter from now on." I thanked him and got back to work, because I knew Karen wasn't finished, not even close. The listing disappeared by the end of the day. But her next move came just as fast. She sent out a community-wide email with the subject line "Boundary Assessments and Future Access Planning," claiming the HOA would be reviewing lake-adjacent properties to ensure equitable access to shared environmental resources. In her world, equitable meant forcefully claiming what never belonged to her. She knew she couldn't win legally, so now she was trying to weaponize HOA policy and neighborhood sentiment. What she didn't realize was that her boldest mistake had already sealed her fate. That mistake had to do with access. You see, Karen lived at the end of a cul-de-sac that backed up to the western tip of my property. When the HOA had first been formed, she pushed a zoning change that turned her road into a zero-lot line shared access zone, her driveway and all. Traffic to her property passed through a narrow gravel road, one that, according to old plats, belonged to me. My grandfather had built it decades before there was even talk of a subdivision, and it had remained open out of courtesy. I'd let it stay that way, never putting up a gate or challenging the boundary, because I didn't want to be the cranky rancher blocking progress. But now, all bets were off. I pulled the plat maps, confirmed ownership, and filed a formal request with the county to install an electronic gate across the gravel lane, citing private security and liability protection. There were no easements on record, no shared ownership, no legal right for anyone to use that road. Within 72 hours. The permit was approved, and 2 days later, the gate crew showed up with steel posts and hydraulic arms. Karen watched from her window as they worked, arms crossed, face redder than a branding iron. That night, she buzzed the intercom for the first time. "You can't do this," she barked. "That's the community's only access point to my house," I replied calmly. "It's not the community's anything. It's mine, and it's closed now." The gate wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a symbol. For years, Karen had walked over everyone in this neighborhood, citing rules, threatening fines, fabricating authority, and now, for the first time, someone had drawn a boundary she couldn't bulldoze with her mouth. But I wasn't done. As soon as the gate was up, I started doing some digging of my own, and what I found shocked even me. Karen's HOA leadership had been built on manipulation from day one. Meeting notes showed that she had strategically blocked elections by sending last-minute emails canceling votes, then claiming lack of quorum as the reason to extend her term. Several homeowners had stories of being fined hundreds for things like flower pots, kids' bikes, and garden gnomes. One man, a veteran on disability, said she tried to fine him for installing a flagpole. When he refused, she had a board member file a noise complaint during his physical therapy sessions. And it didn't stop there. Karen had been using HOA funds for community development research. But there were no receipts, no reports, no visible improvements, just vague mentions and monthly financial updates. The deeper I dug, the more it looked like she had turned the HOA into her personal kingdom, and the neighbors were just subjects to be taxed and ordered around. I took all of it, emails, financial statements, testimonies, and handed it over to Janice. "We're going to court," I told her, "and I'm not stopping until she's out for good." But I also had something else in mind. I remembered that Karen's property sat right next to a narrow plot of undeveloped land, technically a separate parcel, still owned by her ex-husband, who had moved out years ago and wanted nothing to do with HOA drama. I contacted him through a quiet real estate channel, made a full cash offer, and sealed the deal in under a week. Just like that, I owned the only alternate route Karen could have used to bypass the gate. Now both access points, her driveway and the secondary footpath, were in my name, and I wasn't going to block them immediately. No, I wanted her to stew, to understand that this wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. The kind of respect she had denied every one of her neighbors for years. Of course, when she found out, she exploded. Another email went out to the neighborhood titled "Land Warfare and Harassment from Adjacent Properties," filled with lies about intimidation and legal sabotage. But this time, the replies were swift, and not in her favor. People had had enough. One neighbor, a quiet woman named Evelyn, who had lived here since before the HOA even existed, replied publicly, "Karen, maybe if you hadn't tried to sell someone else's lake, we wouldn't be here." Another neighbor offered to help me mow the footpath just out of spite. Slowly, the spell Karen had cast over the community began to break. People stopped attending her meetings. Her board members started stepping down. Even her closest ally, a man named Boyd, who used to send me anonymous complaints about unauthorized livestock, suddenly went quiet. With Karen boxed in and her influence crumbling, I prepared for the final push. Janice filed suit on my behalf, citing defamation, attempted fraud, and HOA abuse of authority. The court granted a preliminary hearing, and we requested a restraining order to keep Karen from making any further attempts to access or claim my land. But the real moment of justice came a few days later, when a title researcher working with Janice uncovered a bombshell Karen had quietly filed a claim with the county 2 months ago to designate the lake area as a shared utility zone, which would have allowed her to sidestep property rights entirely. She had planned the listing, the access push, and the fake boundary assessment, all as part of a broader scheme to annex the lake legally. It was calculated, and it was criminal. I was stunned but also grateful, because now we had everything we needed to shut her down in court permanently. What Karen didn't understand is that land means more than dirt, and water it means family, legacy, and responsibility. She tried to take that from me, but she picked the wrong rancher. And as we moved closer to court, I knew the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every neighbor she'd ever bullied, every voice she tried to silence, and every property she tried to control. Segment 3. Everything begins to unravel for her publicly, legally, and permanently. What we uncovered next left the whole courtroom stunned. Courtrooms have a strange way of revealing things people never thought would see daylight. And Karen walked into that hearing room like she still had the upper hand. Like her authority from the HOA badge she wore so proudly would somehow carry over into a legal proceeding where facts, not intimidation, ruled the floor. I sat near the front with Janice at my side, and behind us sat nearly 24 residents from our neighborhood, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in years, all there to witness the fallout of what Karen had tried to do. When the judge entered and the case was called, she looked up from the bench, scanned the filings, and asked one simple question that instantly made Karen's posture shift from upright to defensive. Why is the president of a homeowners association attempting to sell land she does not own? That moment was the pivot, the point where the narrative turned from Karen's petty power games to cold, hard accountability. Janice stood and calmly began presenting the case. She laid out the original property deed that confirmed the lake had been part of my family's ranch since the 1960s. Then she showed a side-by-side comparison of the fake listing Karen had posted online, complete with marked-up annotations pointing out my private structures in the photos. Next came the emails, all downloaded and printed, Karen's statements about formalizing access, her claims about community ownership, and her boundary review announcement sent to the entire HOA mailing list. The judge listened quietly, asked precise questions, and took notes. Karen's lawyer, a corporate HOA specialist from 2 counties over, tried to argue that it had all been a misunderstanding, poorly worded listing by an overzealous volunteer, and that no actual transaction took place. But that's when Janice dropped the real hammer: the land claim documents Karen had filed with the county planning department. A certified copy showed she had submitted a proposal to change the zoning status of the lake area to a shared public easement, directly contradicting everything she and her attorney were now claiming in court. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Did you or did you not submit this zoning change application?"
"Oh,"
she asked. Karen looked stunned, then muttered something about future possibilities and miscommunication. But it was too late. The trap had closed. The judge set a date for the next hearing and warned that if any further interference with my property was discovered, legal penalties would follow. After the hearing, the real unraveling began. News spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was now publicly documented as having misrepresented property ownership and attempted a covert land grab through legal channels. Her supporters began disappearing. One by one, the remaining board members resigned, citing personal reasons and conflict fatigue. But everyone knew the truth. They didn't want their names tied to the fallout. What none of us had expected, however, was the financial mess that came next. When Janice subpoenaed HOA expense records during the case preparation, we discovered irregularities buried in plain sight: inflated landscaping bills paid to a company owned by Karen's cousin, security patrol invoices double-billed across multiple months, and more than $12,000 labeled under Community Education Fund that had no associated receipts. These weren't just budget issues, they were signs of systematic fraud. It appeared Karen had been running the HOA like a personal piggy bank, siphoning off just enough to avoid immediate suspicion while using her position to maintain dominance over anyone who dared question her. Once those findings were made public, homeowners started asking for refunds, audits, and immediate leadership elections. But the HOA charter had a clause when Karen had snuck in years ago that required a 90-day notice period before any emergency vote could be held. It was her final safeguard, and we had to break it if we wanted change now. That's when something unexpected happened. The soft-spoken elderly neighbor who'd lived in the subdivision longer than Karen stood up at a community meeting and recited the original HOA charter before it was amended. Turns out, she'd kept a printed copy all these years and had witnessed Karen pushing through the new clause in a meeting where half the board had been absent. With that document in hand, Janice was able to file a motion with the court to freeze the HOA's authority pending legal clarification, effectively stopping Karen from exercising any power until the fraud case was resolved. The court approved the motion, and just like that, Karen's leash was cut. No more HOA emails. No more violation notices. No more threats. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted off the entire neighborhood. I remember sitting on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip low over the lake. Hearing the quiet again, the kind of quiet you only get when people feel safe in their own homes. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. She was cornered. But cornered people are unpredictable, and sure enough, 2 days later, someone trespassed onto my property under cover of darkness. I found tire tracks near the gate, a broken fence post by the old barn, and security camera footage showing a masked figure trying to cut the lock on the back access path I now owned. I called the sheriff and handed over the footage. Within hours, Karen's SUV was found parked a mile up the road, engine warm, driver nowhere to be seen. No charges were filed, but the deputy told me she's pushing her luck. Any more of this, and she's looking at criminal trespass. The next court hearing was different from the first. This time, the courtroom was packed. Local reporters showed up. A few even asked me for comment, but I kept quiet. The evidence would speak for itself, and it did. Janice presented new financial documents showing direct transfers from the HOA, operating account to a shell company called Community Resource Solutions, which turned out to be registered under Karen's maiden name. The judge called a recess, just to confirm the business registration, then returned with a look that said everything. Karen's face went pale. She tried to interrupt, saying it was an old consulting firm from a past job, but the judge wasn't having it. This court sees a clear pattern of deception, self-dealing, and abuse of authority, she said. And then she dropped the ruling / a rolling was to be removed from any leadership role in the HOA, barred from future elections, ordered to repay $47,000 in misused funds, and referred for criminal investigation by the state attorney's office. There was silence for a full 10 seconds. Then someone in the back let out a breath they'd clearly been holding. Karen didn't speak. She didn't even look up. She just gathered her things and walked out of the courtroom with her attorney, trailing behind. Just like that, the reign of HOA Karen was over, but that wasn't the end. Now that she had been officially removed, we were free to rebuild. A neighborhood election was held within 2 weeks, and for the first time in over a decade, actual ballots were cast without interference. Evelyn was elected as president, and a new board was assembled with people who genuinely wanted to serve, not control. We started undoing Karen's policies one by one, revoking unnecessary fines, turning unused fees, and most importantly, drafting a new charter that guaranteed transparency, term limits, and resident oversight. As for Karen's house, well, she tried to sell it, but between the ongoing investigation and the fact that her driveway was legally locked behind a gate she had no right to access, the value tanked. Eventually, she was forced to rent it out to a young couple who wanted nothing to do with the HOA. I saw her once more, just once, when she returned to collect a few final things. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked tired, defeated, maybe even ashamed. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was done, the truth was out, and the lake was still mine. After Karen's removal, you could almost feel the shift in the air, like a heavy storm had passed and finally allowed sunlight to return. The neighborhood transformed in ways I hadn't thought possible. It began quietly at first, people trimming hedges without fearing a violation slip, kids riding their bikes past my gate without parents nervously glancing over their shoulders, garden flags and wind chimes reappearing like small badges of reclaimed freedom. For over a decade, Karen had ruled our community with a clipboard and a weaponized rulebook. And now her absence left behind something we hadn't expected: space to breathe. Evelyn, newly elected as HOA president, made it her mission to return things to normal. She personally visited every household, asking for input, checking on seniors, and even organizing a volunteer day to repaint the vandalized benches near the clubhouse Karen had neglected for years. I helped fix the broken lights on the East Trail, and for the first time, neighbors offered me coffee instead of sideways glances. But beneath the relief was still a simmering curiosity about how far Karen's manipulation had gone, and that's where the real surprises started to emerge. You see, during the court-mandated audit of HOA finances, an independent investigator uncovered more than double what we expected in diverted funds, close to $96,000. In unauthorized expenses hidden through falsified vendor names and shell accounts. Some of that money had gone into luxury purchases, a high-end espresso machine delivered to the HOA office that no one remembered ordering, decorative landscaping done only around Karen's house, and payments to a supposed mediation consultant who didn't actually exist. It painted a clear picture. Karen hadn't just tried to take my lake or bend the rules. She had systematically drained the HOA like a corrupt politician, hiding behind bylaws and bureaucracy while treating other people's dues like her own private bank. The community board held an emergency vote to refer her for full criminal prosecution, and the county DA confirmed the investigation was already underway. Word spread fast. Local media picked it up. Headlines read things like HOA president accused of grand theft, fraud, and community rallies after HOA scandal. Our quiet subdivision became a symbol first for abuse, now for resistance and recovery. But what few people knew, and what I hadn't yet shared with anyone, was that I had made one final move Karen never saw coming. It was about to unfold in a way that even I didn't expect. See, while all of this chaos was going down, court hearings, investigations, neighborhood elections, I had quietly kept an eye on a parcel of land sitting just beyond Karen's backyard. It was a forgotten lot, undeveloped, small, and shaped like a wedge that pointed directly between her former home and the HOA walking trail she used to claim as her daily patrol route. It didn't have any building permits, no sewer lines, no utilities, which made it unattractive to most buyers, but not to me. The moment I discovered it was owned by a defunct property management company being dissolved through probate, I made my move. I purchased the lot for less than $9,000 at auction, sight unseen, and spent the next 3 months clearing the brush, grading the soil, and installing a tall privacy fence topped with lattice and creeper vines. I never told anyone what it was for, just kept working, slow and steady, ignoring the whispers. Most assumed I was putting up a tool shed or expanding my ranch line. But when it was finished, I placed a sign on the fence that read "Private. Property, no access, no exceptions." Behind that fence sat the only shortcut trail Karen's renters used to get to the main road. Now they had to walk 3 blocks around the neighborhood, a small inconvenience, but a quiet and final statement that the days of stomping over boundaries were done. What happened next, though, caught me completely off guard. One of the renters, a young woman named Ashley, knocked on my door one afternoon. She was polite, maybe mid-20s, clearly uncomfortable. She explained she and her fiancé had signed a lease with Karen through a private LLC and had no idea what had happened with the HOA. They'd been receiving nasty, melanimous notes taped to their door, accusing them of being part of the corruption, and now their access to the trail was cut off. I felt bad. She was just trying to live her life, far removed from the war that had gone down before she even arrived. So I did something Karen would never have done. I gave her a key fob to the side gate, no questions asked. "You didn't create the mess," I told her. "Shouldn't be punished for cleaning it up." A few days later, Ashley and her fiancés showed up at the community cleanup day, planting flowers near the pond and grilling burgers for the kids. That act of goodwill became something larger. People started talking again, really talking. Stories came out about Karen finding an elderly man for putting out a bird feeder, another neighbor being denied an exterior paint request 5 years in a row, a single mother who was fined weekly for unauthorized parking when she had to work night shifts and parked along the curb. With each shared memory, the community became stronger, more connected, not just in shared outrage, but in understanding that they had allowed someone to isolate and divide them. That understanding bred unity, and unity became momentum. We used that momentum to draft what we called the Fair Neighbor Charter. It was a new HOA code, stripped of ambiguous language, filled with homeowner protections, regular audit clauses, and limits on how board members could spend money. The charter passed unanimously. People clapped when Evelyn read the final clause. Aloud, no community leader shall act unilaterally in any decision affecting property rights without due process and consent. It was everything Karen's HOA never was. But there was still one last matter hanging in the air: restitution. The court had ordered Karen to repay $47,000 in proven misappropriated funds. More claims were still being processed. Her lawyer tried to appeal, citing bankruptcy and financial hardship. But Janice filed a lien against Karen's house, effectively blocking its resale or refinance until every cent was repaid. And with my control over the 2 adjacent parcels, including the access road and the forgotten wedge of land now fenced off, her property's value plummeted. It sat on the market for over 6 months with no serious offers. I heard from a local agent that Karen had tried to trade it for a condo 2 towns over and was laughed out of the deal. Eventually, she had to lease it to a property management firm for long-term rental, her name slowly disappearing from all official documents like smoke fading from the edge of a fire. Around this time, I started getting emails, some from local HOA groups, others from journalists, asking if I'd be willing to speak publicly about what happened. I declined most of them. This was never about fame or public credit. It was about restoring the peace my grandfather had fought to keep, the same peace I nearly lost to someone who mistook paperwork for power. What mattered now wasn't the downfall of Karen. It was the rise of a neighborhood that finally remembered how to protect one another. Still, there was one moment I won't forget. Months after everything had settled, I was fishing at my lake again, just before sunset. The kind of quiet where the only sound is the creak of the dock and the water lapping against the posts. Evelyn walked down the path holding a thermos. She poured 2 cups and sat next to me. After a long silence, she said, "You saved this place, you know." I shook my head. I didn't save it. We all did. I just started it. She nodded, smiled, and said, "Then let's make sure we don't forget how." It's funny how sometimes the things you fight hardest to protect end up meaning more than they ever did before the battle began. And that lake, my lake, now stood not just as a place of peace and history, but as a symbol of everything our neighborhood had reclaimed: truth, trust, and freedom from control. The seasons changed, and with them came signs that the HOA was truly entering a new era. Evelyn continued to lead with grace and transparency, holding monthly meetings out on the community lawn under a pop-up tent with folding chairs and lemonade, where neighbors actually smiled and asked questions instead of avoiding eye contact. We created a community garden near the backlots where the old HOA shed used to sit, turning what was once a storage hub for citation clipboards into a sanctuary of sunflowers and tomatoes. Kids started playing by the old oak again. Couples walked hand in hand around the pond. And no one, absolutely no one, mentioned fines, bylaws, or uniform paint colors. Karen's name had all but vanished from neighborhood memory. Her property, still legally blocked in on both sides by my adjacent lots, sat quietly under long-term rental. Occasionally I'd see the tenants come and go, respectful, unobtrusive, and seemingly unaware that their driveway once served as the epicenter of a war waged in whispers and courtroom arguments. The lien against Karen's house remained untouched. The restitution payments trickled in slowly. garnished from small claims filed against the minimal income she now received through her management company. Her reputation, once wielded like a sword at every HOA meeting, had collapsed into a whisper that no one had time to repeat. Still, it wasn't about humiliation, not really. I didn't need Karen to suffer, and I didn't find joy in her downfall. What mattered was that justice had been served and the land restored. I began inviting neighbors to the lake again, not through HOA authority, but through real human invitation. I hosted a small fish fry on the dock one Saturday afternoon with homemade cornbread and sweet tea, and more than 30 people showed up with folding chairs, casseroles, and stories about the old days before the HOA went rogue. They told me they felt free again, safe, seen, and that was the moment I realized this was never about fences or gates, or even that lake. It was about people. It was about standing up when no one else would, so everyone else could finally breathe. The sheriff stopped by once during that fish fry, not because of a complaint, but just to check in. He smiled, told me the department had quietly followed the case, even after it left local jurisdiction. Said he wished more people knew their rights like I had. Told him knowing your rights wasn't enough. You had to fight for them too, even when the fight was inconvenient, unpopular, or lonely. Especially then. Janice, my attorney and now trusted friend, visited the ranch one morning a few weeks later, holding a manila envelope under her arm. "It's done," she said. Inside were the final closure papers from the civil court Karen's appeal had been rejected. The state had declined to reduce her financial penalties, and the criminal investigation remained open pending the DA's final audit of her HOA expenditures. Janice grinned. "She can't touch you. She can't touch this community. It's over." I thanked her, not just for the work, but for the belief. She'd seen this through, not just as a lawyer, but as someone who understood the value of legacy, the cost of silence, and the importance of principle. After she left, I walked down to the lake alone and stood by the edge where my father's old fishing chair still sat. I hadn't moved it during the entire ordeal. I'd left it there like a quiet promise that no matter what Karen or anyone else tried to pull, this place would remain ours. I looked out at the water, smooth as glass, and thought about everything that had changed. The dock was rebuilt. The land was respected. And the people, well, the people had woken up. Later that month, Evelyn invited me to speak at the new community dedication, a casual gathering at the clubhouse with a few speeches and a lot of homemade food. I declined at first, said I wasn't the speech type, but she insisted. So I stood up in front of the group, cleared my throat, and said only this: we let one person speak for all of us for too long. Now we speak for ourselves. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering what kind of neighborhood we want to live in. Let's never forget how easily it can slip away and how hard we have to fight to get it back. That was it. Applause, just quiet nods, the kind that matter more. People got it. They understood. Afterward, as I was leaving, a young boy tugged at my sleeve and said, "Thanks for fixing the lake, Mr. Steph." I smiled and said, "I didn't fix it, kid. We just stopped someone from breaking it." That winter, with the frost biting at the ranch fence posts and the lake freezing at the edges, I got a letter handwritten, no return address. It was from Karen. Her tone was stiff, apologetic, but not fully surrendered. She claimed she never meant to cause real harm, that she thought she was protecting property values and preserving order, and that if she had gone too far, she hoped someday the neighborhood would forgive her. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in my grandfather's old ledger where we kept family ranch records, and left it there. Some things don't need a reply. Some lessons teach themselves. Forgiveness doesn't always come with a handshake. Sometimes it's just the choice not to chase revenge when you already have peace. Spring came again. And with it came renewal, trees in bloom, kids racing around barefoot, the lake glistening with new life. The HOA, once a source of dread, now held gardening workshops, potlucks, and movie nights under the stars. The same residents who once avoided meetings now filled the lawn with laughter and folded lawn chairs, no longer fearing citations for stepping an inch out of line. The fences I built remained, but not out of spite, out of care. Boundaries, after all, aren't just walls. They're reminders of where respect begins. And this neighborhood, for all it had endured, had finally found its way back to respect. In the end, Karen didn't lose because she was wrong. She lost because she believed no one would stand up to her. But someone did. And when one person stands, others follow. That's how you beat tyranny in a neighborhood. It's how you reclaim stolen peace. It's how you remind folks that homes are more than houses and land is more than dirt. A legacy, one worth protecting, even if you have to go to war for it. And now, every time I walk by the lake, see a child cast a line off the dock, or hear neighbors laugh without fear, I know exactly what we won. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember the power of one voice against injustice. And don't forget subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel for more powerful stories that show how standing up can change everything.